issue of tariff is resolved. That's India's export and import with Russia, and that's what Trump has clearly said. Meanwhile, from West Asia, we will tell you how Israel's security cabinet has approved plans to take over the entire Gaza city. Our top focus on the show: in a dramatic escalation of US-India trade tensions, US President Donald Trump has said rather added conditions to future India negotiations. Reports suggest that no trade talks are expected until Russian oil issue are resolved. Trump also denied any trade negotiations. Meanwhile, a sweeping wave of new tariffs from 10% to 50% on more than 60 countries is now reshaping global markets. Markets are reacting, and India is fighting back.
Mr. President, just to follow up on the India tariffs, do you expect increased trade negotiations, since you've announced the 50% tariff?
No, not until we get it resolved.
From the Oval Office, President Trump has ruled out the possibility of increased trade negotiations with India, not until it gets resolved, after signing an executive order raising tariffs from 25% to 50%, effective on August 27th. New Delhi has labeled the move unfair, unjustified and unreasonable, accusing the US of double standards for targeting India, while other buyers of Russian oil, China, Turkey, remain untouched. Prime Minister Modi affirmed his willingness to bear the cost for farmers, fishermen and dairy workers, citing national interest and energy security. Across the globe, US tariffs are surging. A broad structure of 10% to 50% has taken effect against more than 60 countries, with major markets like Brazil, Switzerland facing steep penalties. The US average import tax now hovers around 18.6%, the highest since the 1930s. Global markets have taken notice. On August 1st, weak job data, just 73,000 jobs added in July, and unemployment up to 4.2%. Alongside Trump's tariffs, it triggered a sell-off across Wall Street and global markets. Still, markets have recovered on bets of Federal Reserve rate cuts and strong earnings reports. Apple's investments helped buoy the sentiment, though concerns about inflation and supply chain upheaval persist. Experts warn that these tariffs could raise US consumer prices, disrupt global supply chains, and chill the economic growth. And well, for more on this, joining us live on Race to Power is Professor Andrew Latham, Distinguished Scholar of International Relations, Strategic Studies and Political Economy. Welcome to Race to Power, Mr. Latham. First up, Trump has clearly ruled out possibility of any trade negotiations with India, but he's rather kept it uncertain at this point of time. Your assessment first up.
Well, he's escalating clearly. He hasn't been able to get his way with India and with Prime Minister Modi in the way he did with Japan, for example, and the European Union, and even with Mexico and Canada. There are a few countries that have stood up to him, not because they're more morally virtuous, but because they have domestic political constituencies to look after. In India's case, the agricultural sector, dairy sector come to mind very, very quickly. So in the Indian case, Prime Minister Modi simply doesn't have negotiating, doesn't have any wiggle room to negotiate with him. And so he's standing up to Trump, and Trump is reacting the way in which a petulant child tends to react, which is he's thrown a bit of a tantrum. Now, I could put it charitably and say he's upping the ante, he's using what leverage he has, he's putting more pressure. But at the end of the day, he's not treating China like this, for example. And the United States also imports some things from Russia. So the Indian import of Russian oil can't be the sticking point here. It's broader than that.
Right, absolutely, Mr. Latham. And when asked to Trump about how US also has trade deals with Russia, he had nothing to say. My follow-up question to you is that, do you think Trump is using Russia as a leverage against India? And with New Delhi clearly standing up to Trump, does the US president actually have a plan in terms of how he's going to deal with India?
I think President Trump has two things in mind, one of which is he does want to deliver on his promise, albeit belatedly, to bring peace to Ukraine. And I think he sees the Indian piece there as leverage. If he can cut off Putin's oil sales to India, maybe that's more pressure on Putin. But I think there's a bigger thing going on here, which is in 1945, at the end of the Second World War, the United States built what was called the Bretton Woods system, basically a free trade system, the World Bank, the WTO, the GATT, things like that. And that had a good run from 1945 until the early 2020s, but now it's falling apart. Partly because BRICS and China want to de-dollarize, which dollarization was a key part of that arrangement. So those rules, those norms, those institutions that the U.S. created after the Second World War and globalized after the Cold War, they're falling apart. And Trump has something to do with that, but it's bigger than Trump. It's simply falling apart. And he lacks the imagination to think of a new global trading order that's fair, that promotes peace and harmony, the way in which the Bretton Woods system did. What he sees in its place is a global hub and spoke system, with the United States being the hub and engaging in bilateral trade negotiations with all the other countries in the world. So multilateralism is out the window, being replaced by Americocentric bilateralism. Some countries have gone along with that.
Right.
But some countries, Brazil, China, and India have said, and Russia have said, absolutely not. We're not going along with that. And so that's where we are, turbulent times.
My last question to you, Professor Latham, how perhaps does all of this, because Trump has stalled negotiations, his tariff 50% on India comes after multiple rounds of talks with India. How does all of that leave India-US ties moving forward?
I think fraud. It's very counterproductive what the president is doing. It's alienating a natural partner in the Indo-Pacific, which is India. You need India if you want to contain and blunt and balance against China. He's pushing India further into the BRICS camp, and India has been, of course, opposed to China's de-dollarization program and whatnot. So he's alienating the countries that he needs from a geopolitical perspective. He's also alienating the Indian diaspora in the United States, which is a very powerful constituency, which historically has voted Democrat Party, but under Trump was drifting towards the Republican Party, and now we see that being reversed. So what he's doing is very counterproductive, both domestically and internationally both geopolitically and geoeconomically. But those are the times we're in, and it would take somebody with a much more capacious and vivid imagination to reimagine a global trading order, which everybody kind of buys into. He simply lacks that capability because at the end of the day, he's a real estate mogul.
Right, Professor Latham, thank you so much for joining us here on WION World is One with your insights.
Great pleasure.
Well, amidst the Russian onslaught in Ukraine, US President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin are set to hold a summit meeting. According to Fox News, Putin and Trump could meet as soon as next week, possibly on Monday. Two sources familiar with the negotiations told Fox News that Rome is one destination that has been discussed. The two sides had earlier spoken of Dubai as the venue. Since the beginning of Trump's second stint in power, the two leaders have held talks over the phone 6 times. In February, the duo held talks for over an hour and a half and discussed reaching a ceasefire in Ukraine in distant future. A month later, the two leaders spoke over the phone for almost 2 hours. During these talks, Russia agreed to halt attack on Ukrainian energy sites. Then, in May, Trump-Putin held talks for another 2 hours. This time, Putin agreed to engage with the Ukrainian side on drafting a memorandum of understanding regarding a potential future peace agreement. As tensions escalated between Iran and the US, the duo held talks again, this time a little over an hour, where Trump told Putin that he would appreciate Russian assistance on the question of Iranian nuclear program. And then 10 days later, both Putin and Trump held another phone call that lasted a little under an hour, and Moscow expressed its readiness to hold peace talks with Kyiv. A fortnight later, Trump-Putin held an hour-long phone call where Trump expressed his frustration over making no headway in talks with Russia, whereas Putin emphasized the need to resolve all differences by political and diplomatic means. Interestingly, on his campaign trail, Trump had claimed that he would end the war in Ukraine within 24 hours of returning to office. But since the start of his second term, Trump's deadline for Moscow to wrap up the war in Ukraine has changed frequently. On May 28th, Trump had announced a 2-week deadline for Putin to demonstrate that he actually wants to end the war. The ultimatum had come on the back of some of Russia's deadliest attacks on Ukraine and signaled Trump's growing frustration with Putin. Trump on July 14th had then announced a 50-day ultimatum for Russia to conclude the war in Ukraine or else face punishing sanctions. A fortnight later, Trump shortened the deadline to 10 to 12 days. And a day before the deadline ended, Kremlin announced that Putin would be meeting Trump. What happens during the upcoming summit and the meeting could ultimately decide the fate of the war in Ukraine. The question is, will Trump come up with a fresh deadline for Russia, or will the war stretch on? That only time will tell. Well, in the United States, Maryland, a federal judge has blocked the Trump administration from denying citizenship to children born to those living in the country, illegally or temporarily. And this is the fourth such ruling nationwide since the Supreme Court's key decision in June. Earlier, 2 other district courts, along with an appellate panel of judges, blocked Trump's birthright citizenship order nationwide. In February, Maryland Court Judge Broadman issued an initial injunction blocking the order. However, the U.S. Supreme Court's ruling in June had overturned that decision, along with other similar court rulings affecting the nationwide blocks on the order. The Supreme Court justices ruled that lower courts generally cannot issue nationwide injunctions. However, they did not rule out other types of court orders that might have nationwide effects, such as those issued in class action lawsuits or cases brought by the states. In a recent decision, Judge Boardman approved a class of children born or to be born in the U.S. after February 19, 2025, who would be affected by Trump's order on birthright citizenship. She stated that the plaintiffs have a strong likelihood of prevailing, contending that order violates the citizenship clause of the 14th Amendment. The judge also cautioned that the plaintiffs would face irreparable harm if the order were implemented. And well, for more on this, our correspondent Susan Therani is now joining us from New York. Hi, Susan. This is the fourth block of Trump's birthright citizenship order since the Supreme Court order. Get us the latest on this.
Right. So the Trump administration can still appeal this, so it's not set in stone. But despite the fact that the Supreme Court said that federal judges cannot make nationwide injunctions for the entire country, this judge, as you mentioned, believes that her standing is really valid and that it will ultimately go through, considering the fact that she says she's not reinstating old provisions and bringing out what she did before, but she has a new case that is not only related to a class action, but that it will affect these individuals that are here illegally, or not only, if they already have children here, but are pregnant, with the help of some immigration rights groups. So she's saying that this is a new case. It is valid after the Supreme Court order, and it has a potential to go through. But nonetheless, as I mentioned, the Trump administration will likely appeal this. And once again, it's going to set in motion some other legalities.
Right, Susan. Thanks for getting us the latest. Well, amid global concern over the humanitarian situation in Gaza, Israel's Prime Minister has pushed the envelope further with plans for occupying Gaza's city. Israel's lawmakers in the Knesset have approved the plan called Takeover of Gaza City. The move comes amid rising pressure from far-right coalition parties pushing Netanyahu to fully take over Gaza. Hamas has called Israel's decision, and I'm quoting here, a blatant coup against the negotiation procedure. Well, first up, the current situation on the division of control over Gaza. Well, the map here on your screens, it shows that Israel's defense forces, they have already control of more than 75% of the Gaza Strip. And Palestinian control continues over Gaza City, that's of Deir el-Balah in central Gaza, extending to parts of Khan Yunis here and Al-Mawasi as well in the south. The UN says that 87% of Gaza, it consists of militarized zones or is under evacuation orders. Well, in the plan's first phase, Israel would issue an evacuation order for the residents of the Gaza city, estimated to be around 1 million people, to be moved towards the southern part of the Gaza Strip. And this will be done in a bid to allow time for the establishment of civilian infrastructure in central Gaza, including hospitals and camps for evacuees. This phase is expected to last several weeks, which is phase 1 of the complete takeover of Gaza. Israel would then launch a military offensive, that's the phase 2, and reports say that the military campaign was expected to last between 4 to 5 months, and it also involves 4 to 5 divisions of the IDF. And they also plan to expand IDF reach in Gaza City and also central Gaza. The plan was to expand to the camps, like I mentioned, in the central Gaza, where the IDF has barely maneuvered so far. The civilian population is expected to be further pushed towards the southern strip, and that is towards the Mawasi zone in the southern strip of Gaza. And they also plan maneuvers to take place in areas where hostages are believed to be held, with efforts towards avoiding any harm to them. So this is about the phase of Israel's complete takeover of Gaza, which Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been clearly adamant on. But Palestinians injured, hungry, displaced and battered by the Israeli offensive say that there is nothing left to occupy in the Gaza Strip. On the other hand, several families of hostages are unhappy with Netanyahu's decision, fearing that those still left in Hamas captivity will be put in danger. Many global leaders have condemned Israel's move to take over the Gaza Strip. EU Chief Ursula von der Leyen has called for Israel to reconsider its decision. UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer has called it a wrong move, saying that it will only bring more bloodshed. Experts also fear that Israel's decision of what they've referred to as a military takeover will further isolate Israel from the global community after the latest outcry and global condemnation over mass hunger in Gaza, believed to be caused by Israel's blockade.
It's difficult to imagine what it will look like other than to say that it's a bleak and dark chapter in Israel's own history, its evolution, and certainly for the Palestinians in the short term, trying to survive under incredibly harsh and unimaginable conditions inside Gaza. There's likely to be a high level of further displacement, a further wave of displacement of Palestinians who have been seeking shelter in makeshift sort of tents and temporary housing, and trying to survive amongst the rubble. So it's likely that they will be displaced as Israeli military operations expand in Gaza City. Their access to food, to essential supplies, will be surely disrupted, at least for a certain period of time, whilst they move south inside the Strip. But there's a high level of uncertainty as to civilian safety, Palestinian safety, and their human security inside Gaza should this plan take place. And it looks like it is likely to in the coming days, even if it's in a more localized operation in Gaza City. So the implications will be far-reaching.
Well, U.S. is turning up the heat in Venezuela's President Nicolas Maduro, seeking information that may lead to his arrest. The Trump administration has doubled the reward for critical insight on Maduro and is now offering $50 million. The U.S. government had already offered $25 million before, and Attorney General Pam Bondi announced twice the amount of reward money now. Bondi has accused Maduro of being directly linked to drug smuggling operations and prominent criminal groups such as Tren de Aragua and Sinaloa cartel. The U.S. has labeled Maduro as, and I'm quoting here, one of the world's largest narco traffickers on claims that the Venezuelan president collaborates with cartels to flood the U.S. with fentanyl-laced cocaine. Venezuela has reacted strongly against all these accusations. Venezuelan foreign minister said on Telegram that the announcement was the most ridiculous smokescreen ever seen. The dignity of our homeland is not for sale. We repudiate this crude political propaganda operation. That's what he said. Foreign Minister Gill also taunted Bondi for her flip-flop over the controversial Epstein files and slammed her track record with empty promises like the secret Epstein list. Washington's latest bid to turn up the heat on Nicolas Maduro comes just weeks after former head of Venezuela's military intelligence, Hugo Carvajal, pleaded guilty to drug trafficking charges during his trial in the U.S. He also fled Venezuela after calling for Maduro to be overthrown. He had first denied all charges against him, but later he changed his plea to guilty. The U-turn gave rise to speculation and reports that Carvajal had negotiated a deal with the U.S. government in exchange for information on Maduro. However, this was never officially confirmed by American officials. During Trump's first term, the U.S. government charged Maduro and other high-ranking Venezuelan officials with a range of offenses, including narco-terror, corruption, and drug trafficking. At that time, the U.S. Department of Justice claimed Maduro had worked with the Colombian rebel group, FARC, to use cocaine as a weapon to flood the United States. The reward was first set at $15 million in 2020. That's when U.S. prosecutors charged Maduro with drug trafficking. It was increased to $25 million in January 2025, as Maduro was sworn in for a third term alongside new sanctions on top officials.
De la Venezuela de bien, porque nos veamos con frecuencia.
Well, as the race for Cameroon's presidential elections nears, the country's Constitutional Council has upheld the electoral body's decision to exclude key contender Maurice Kamto from the 12th of October presidential polls. Seen as a challenger perhaps to incumbent President Paul Biya, Maurice Kamto denounced the court's decision to reject his candidacy for October presidential polls and termed unfounded and arbitrary.
On August 4th, we presented to this high authority all the factual and legal arguments in favor of validating my candidacy, as well as the evidence establishing the fraud of the second candidacy attributed to money there. On August 5th, after its deliberation, the Constitutional Council rejected my appeal, requesting the validation of my candidacy on the grounds that it is unfounded.
President Paul Biya is seeking a new term that could keep him in office until he is nearly 100 years old. Paul Biya came to power more than 4 decades ago in 1982 when his predecessor Ahmadou Hajado resigned. Kamto was considered Biya's strongest rival in past elections. In fact, he came second during the last presidential election in 2018 with 14% of the vote, while Biya secured over 70% in an election marred by irregularities and a low turnout. Biya's health also has been a source of speculation. In 2024, he vanished from public view for 42 days. That prompted rumors about his condition before he reappeared at official functions. And well, with that, we slip into a very short break. You are watching WION World is One. Stay tuned.
From the bustling trading floors of Wall Street to the vibrant exchanges of Asian stock markets, WION breaks it down for you to make sense of what's happening, as we reveal the key factors behind events, strategic battles, and the game-changing business decisions that shape the world. We bring you all of this and more on World Business Watch.
The stress of our world can take a toll on our physical and emotional health. Here, in New York's Catskill Mountains, lies a luxurious place of healing called WION Wellness Center. The WION Wellness Center provides 500,000 square feet of natural methods to manage diabetes, hypertension, chronic pain, obesity, depression, anxiety, and other conditions. We use the traditions of centuries-old natural science from India, yoga, Ayurveda, acupuncture, and naturopathy in personalized programs that help you take charge of your own health. A minimum 5-day stay is recommended for best results. Book now at yo1.com.
To bring the benefits of the Subhash Chandra Show to your educational institution, teachers and students, send an invitation to Juhi Jha at juhi@such.org.in.
WION, India's global voice, the channel that brings you the biggest stories from across the world through India's lens. Now available in more than 190 countries worldwide. Because we believe that the world is one. Watch us in Africa, Europe, USA and Canada, South America, Asia Pacific, Middle East and North African regions. Also available on these digital platforms across the world. WION, World is One.
अबे रिक्शा वाले पैसे ना लेना मैडम से, भाभी है तुम्हारी।
You are mad, ऐसा कुछ नहीं है।